Thank you, everybody. Right, so the mystery of divine intervention. The title to me holds a sense of wonder and a feeling of awe. I think of my own personal experiences throughout my life and those of my friends and family. This presentation is my personal acknowledgement and gratitude for the divine assistance that has been shown to myself and others. So, divine intervention, what does that mean? Let's start with the literal meaning of divine. The term evolved in the late 14th century and meant pertaining to, in the nature of, or proceeding of, from a god. This came from the Old French word divin, with a similar meaning from the Latin divinius, meaning from a god. The ancient Greeks and Romans' daily routines involved the practice of prayers and offerings to the gods, and in return they hoped their prayers for help and assistance be answered, from small shrines in their homes to public altars and temples throughout the cities. Seeking help from the gods was a normal and daily occurrence. In the lararium, which is the picture on the side, is a little shrine that they used to have in their homes. And they used to pay their respects to the protective spirit of the household. They saw proof of divine assistance in natural events, such as an easy birth for a new mother, storms at seas driving back invading ships. But then at the flip of a coin, the assistance could equally be viewed as withdrawn. Populations could be struck down by pestilence, crops fail. Was this the result of a petulant god who had been angered or somehow offended? Those ancient gods of the Mediterranean were a fickle lot, indeed. A fascinating example from the old world is the Oracle of Delphi. The priestess known as Pythia, chosen for this role, would enter into a trance, and the god Apollo would speak through Pythia and relay helpful messages. Advice on the best trade routes, political alliances, war strategies, and what type of crops to plant, and when. This was practical help given to the local population, everyday people alongside rulers and generals. I've been fortunate to have visited some of these ancient sites: the Temple to Diana in Nîmes, France, Olympia in Greece, and the magnificent columns that all remain from the Temple of Jupiter. Shrines and temples dotted around Athens. I can assure you that there remains an energy at these sites that after all this time still remains. The link between gods and humans is still felt. You've probably felt that same energy walking into a magnificent cathedral, a pretty country church, an ancient Buddhist shrine. Those spiritual places hold the energy of prayer, devotion and love, where humans set aside the mundane world and focus their attention on the spiritual realm, opening themselves at a heart and soul level to be at one with the highest energy source. Over the centuries, all that focused energy builds the vibrational level, so that when you do enter these places, you really feel that energy. Some places are much stronger than others, and it hits you as you walk in the door. It's like a warm wall. And just to hold that thought about energy, because that'll come up a bit further on in the talk. That was a particularly beautiful Buddhist temple that we found out in the about a couple of hours out of Hanoi, and very, very old, and had an amazing energy. When you walk in, it was just this calmness and just silence. It was just all enveloping. Let's have a look at some biblical examples of divine intervention. I mean, the Bible's just full of it. It's just one big divine intervention. Example of God intervening directly or sending angels to intervene on his behalf. Daniel in the lion's den is such a story. Daniel was thrown to the lion's den to be devoured, but an angel appeared and stayed with Daniel until morning. The angel shut the mouth of the lions. Daniel walked out of the lion's den unharmed, and King Darius was relieved and then tossed the treacherous advisors and their families, unfortunately, into the lion's den instead. Interestingly, the king who had ordered Daniel into the den actually wanted Daniel to be saved. The king had said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." So with this fervent wish, along with Daniel's unwavering trust in his situation, he was saved. But there's something else to the story that I suspect may have contributed to Daniel's survival. It is recorded that God gave Daniel, along with his 3 friends, a knowledge and an understanding in every kind of literature and wisdom. The king had much earlier interviewed Daniel and his friends, along with all other trainees. No one was found equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The 4 young men served in the king's court in every matter of wisdom, understanding, languages as well, whatever the king consulted them about. He found them 10 times better than all the diviner, priests, and mediums in his entire kingdom. Were Daniel and his friends what we might think of as adepts, ascended masters on earth? Something to think about. The 3 friends themselves survived King Nebuchadnezzar's fiery ordeal. Now, the king had given strict orders for the furnace to be made extremely hot, so hot that they burned up the guards who took these men to the furnace. Then the men, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, still tied up, fell into the blazing heat, the heart of the fire. And suddenly Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement, and he asked his officials, "Didn't we tie 3 men up and throw them in the blazing furnace?" And they said, "Yes, we did, Your Majesty." "Then why do I see 4 men walking around in the fire? They're not tied up, they show no sign of being hurt, and the 4th one looks like an angel." I love these stories as they tell us of the power of trust, faith, and ultimately a rescue by a divine being witnessed by others, and another being, or an angel, there with them at their time of trial. Now let's have a look at divine intervention in today's world and delve into the different kinds of intervention and assistance from the unseen realm. We may have seen TV news, stories, read about things in the paper, or personal accounts from friends. Those odd stories that occasionally crop up that contain a sequence of events that cause you to take notice. Something in that story makes you question, could there have been some kind of influence altering the outcome, intervening to minimise a tragedy, or even stop or divert an occurrence? Think back to October 2022. There was a shocking TV news report of someone shooting and stabbing at a Thai preschool. I don't know if you remember that. It was terrible. There were 36 dead, including 24 children. At the end of the TV news story, the reporter said that there would have been many more potential victims, but the school bus had broken down and there was a very heavy rain event. I heard the sentence and I immediately thought, okay, maybe someone was trying to help out there and do what they could. Normally the preschool had 90 children there, but on this day, due to the bus breaking down and this really heavy rain, there were just over 20 children. And you may think, well, why didn't they, the unseen helpers, stop the killer before he even got there? Unseen helpers do what they can with who they are able, and with that killer's mind so messed up with drugs, as it turns out, all on drugs, and fixated on his plan, It would have been very difficult to influence him to change his course of action. So in my opinion, the unseen helpers influenced who and what they could, perhaps impressing on the minds of the parents not to take their children to preschool that day because of the really heavy rain event that was happening. And I also suspect that they might have had, a part in the bus breaking down. When divine intervention occurs, it's a defining moment in someone's life. It is undeniable proof that there is an unseen world actively engaging with positive influence on our lives. People acknowledge divine intervention when there is no other explanation for how an event turned out. This could be by way of a miraculous healing, the right person being in the right place at the right time to assist another person or persons, circumstances changing at the last minute to keep someone from harm, the use of animals as divine influence to save and protect a person, and the unseen helpers who sometimes show up in physical form, human or angelic, to guide and uplift someone in need. Miraculous healing. To me, it has always been something I've been quite sceptical about, as I had no personal experience of it. But I'm going to take you back to an event in 2005. A Baptist friend of mine invited me to attend a healing evening at the Rangiora New Life Church. She told me there was an out-of-town healer. An evangelist Western carrier was visiting, and would I like to go? I had never heard of this person and didn't know anything about it, so I thought, oh well, why not? I'll go with an open mind. So along we went, and I'd asked my son Louis, who was about 9 or 10 at the time, how he would feel about getting some healing for a recently diagnosed dental condition that was untreatable. He said he was okay with that, so he went forward. There was a line of people standing waiting for healing, and he went up and stood with all these adults. And when Weston came along the line to ask him, he told him exactly what he wanted, to be healed. And he did that, healed Louis, prayed over Louis, and then Louis came back and sat down. A few minutes later, there was a request from Western Carrier for everyone to gather around a man who had keeled over. Sometimes you see them on TV or have seen it, they just keel over. And he looked to be fairly unconscious, he was out to it. So we were like, oh gosh, what's going on? So I gathered around, and then Weston had this man's legs, and he had like 3/4 trousers on, and one of his shoes was a built-up shoe. And so the man, obviously one leg was longer than the other, and it was about 15 centimetres in difference, so it was quite significant. So he wanted everyone to witness this difference in the leg length, and then he asked everyone to pray. And I was just watching, I wasn't praying. I thought, I'm just going to watch and see what happens. I found it quite fascinating. And there was a real intensity in the feeling. People were very intensely praying and invoking a healing to come down. And so I was watching this. And then I saw the leg that was the shorter leg kind of go blurry around the shin area, and I sort of blinked. I thought, oh, what's going on there? It's a bit weird. I thought it was my eyes. But for about 5 seconds, that man's shin went blurry. And then everyone went, oh. Weston got everybody to look. His hands were still in the same place, and the legs were of equal length. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. But it was just a fascinating event, and I don't know how to explain it except that I felt that Weston must have been a natural channel for some amazing universal healing energy, and he conducted that down into that man. And of course all the focused energy from the people that were around also invoking that healing spirit, and it happened. I saw it. So, and as for my son's dental woes, Well, you never needed another filling. So, proof enough for me.
Like I'm seeing Susanna.
Proof enough for me. I'm very grateful. So, on continuing of that thought of invoking healing and assistance, I'm now going to play a video. It's about people being placed in the right place at the right time to potentially, in a tragic situation, to enable assistance to be given. And those unseen helpers may not be able to stop certain events unfolding. It could be a karmic thing that needs to play out, but they can assist by influencing humans, would-be helpers, to be in that right place at the right time. So I'll play this for you now.
911, what's your emergency? There has been a really serious car accident. We have a vehicle that is upside down and on fire. These people are trapped and we need the God of life. We need help now.
4 lives intersected on Highway 6 in Crawford, Texas that day. Sherry and Cody Clemens, Lisa Bowden, and Anthony Russo all met in the midst of tragedy. But all say they had a supernatural encounter on that rain-slicked road that changed their lives forever.
I was on my way home from work. It had been raining all that day. I just lost control.
Lisa's SUV slid into the path of Anthony's oncoming car.
I remember seeing the car come through my windshield, and that's it, I blacked out. I remember waking up.
The impact flipped Lisa's SUV multiple times, crushing Anthony's car. Both drivers were trapped.
My feet were on fire. The car was filling up with smoke.
There was fire coming in through my left door, and it had burnt my arm. My leg, I didn't feel no pain or anything like that, but I just knew I wasn't going to die this way, and the steering wheel was stuck in my chest and couldn't move.
Anthony blacked out a second time. Lisa began to pray.
I just remember saying, God help me. And it seemed like when I had that peace come over me that everything was going to be okay, is when Sherry showed up.
Sherry and Cody Clemens saw the wrecked vehicles and raced to help. Sherry called 911. Then she cried out to God for a miracle.
I could just feel the gift of faith stirring inside of my chest that nobody is going to die here today. Nobody. I'm not going to watch anybody die. God is going to show up.
The couple ran over to Lisa's burning SUV. Cody climbed inside to try to pull Lisa from the growing flames.
God gave me the courage to go in there because I told him right there I was scared. I didn't want to die. I didn't want to burn up. The next thing I know, I'm in the car.
I was upside down and the seatbelt, I kept trying to release it, but it wouldn't release.
I handed her the knife and she cut the seatbelt and she fell to the roof. The next thing that happened was that both her and I realized that she wasn't coming out of the vehicle. The roof had been crushed and there was not much room, maybe less than 8 inches or for her to get through.
In a split second, the impossible situation turned into a divine rescue.
When I reached out, we grabbed each other's hands. There was another set of hands that grabbed our hands.
As I saw Cody's hands, I saw a set of just white hands around his. As he started pulling me through, it was just a burst of white light.
Before I knew it, we were both outside the vehicle.
Sherry, who had been standing next to the SUV, witnessed the whole thing.
God sent an angel to pull Lisa out of that car. And I saw this bright white light. And then I saw these hands reach past me where there was no room. And they grabbed a hold of Cody's hands and Lisa's hands. And all of a sudden it was like, boop. Cody and Lisa were on the grass next to me. It could only be God's angels pulling me through there.
But the worst was far from over. A few feet away, Anthony lay unconscious with no way to escape the fire consuming his car.
There was this huge explosion and the flames just completely rolled over the car and over Anthony, just consumed it in the black rolling flames. And I just screamed, I said, God, send your angels now.
At that moment, another eyewitness saw a second miracle unfold.
I was just crying out, God, you've got to help this man. You've got to help this man. And he seemed to just emerge through the door, and he just kind of floated out on the ground. So I believe that God sent supernatural angels here to help him get out of that vehicle.
Even though Anthony lost consciousness during the accident, he says there's no doubt who rescued him from the fiery crash.
Oh, definitely God. Definitely. I feel like what happened to me was a miracle.
I can only say that the Lord sent an angel and removed Lisa from the car because she was not going to come out of that car. And he also sent an angel and pulled Anthony out of his car because he was not coming out of that car either.
Soon after, firefighters arrived to douse the flames.
God had already pulled everybody out of the vehicles and everybody was on the grass. And all of a sudden we look over and everybody looks and there's this huge rainbow just completely encompassing the entire scene.
Lisa and Anthony were taken to the hospital with serious injuries, including broken bones and severe burns.
I went through 8 months of rehab and I'm able to walk. Recovery has been great. My burns have healed with no problems, no skin grafts. That was another miracle that happened.
It took me, over a year. I was going between a walker and crutches and then from crutches to a cane. I feel good to be walking with a cane, but I still want to walk without one.
2 years later, the miracle on Highway 6 remains etched in their minds. A day that desperate prayers were answered. Precious lives were saved.
I'll cut that short there, but pretty amazing story. There's another, I found another sort of continuation from that, and where they were interviewing the firefighters and they just couldn't get their heads around how the people had actually got physically out of the cars. So, quite interesting. Annie Besant herself was rescued from peril. C.W. Ledbetter writes an account. She was in the centre of a very dangerous street fracas, and seeing several men struck down, evidently badly hurt close to her, was in a momentary expectation of a similar fate, since escape from the crush seemed quite impossible. Suddenly she experienced a curious sensation of being whirled out of the crowd and found herself standing quite uninjured and entirely alone in a small by-street parallel with that in which the disturbance had taken place. She still heard the noise of the struggle, and while she stood wondering what on earth had happened to her, 2 or 3 men who had escaped from the crowd came running around the corner of the street, and on seeing her expressed great astonishment and pleasure, saying that when the brave lady so suddenly disappeared from the midst of the fight, they had felt certain she had been struck down. At the time, no sort of explanation was forthcoming, and she returned home in a very mystified condition. But at a later period, she mentioned this strange occurrence to Madame Blavatsky. She was informed that, her karma being such as to enable her to be saved from her exceedingly dangerous position, one of the masters had especially sent someone to protect her in view of the fact that her life was needed for the work. And this story was taken from Invisible Helpers by C.W. Ledbetter. The next stories are a beautiful reminder of how we are loved and cared about by unseen beings. How the compassion and empathy from higher realms can manifest into earth plane to provide comfort and upliftment. Even when we're not asking for assistance, they see the need and will act. A Canadian friend of mine shared with me last year something that happened to her when she was just a young mother with twin babies and also a 2-year-old. Her husband was away often with his work with Air Canada, and she was fairly isolated where they lived and didn't have family nearby to support her. She had stepped out of a church service as the babies were beginning to cry, and she was feeling overwhelmed. And as she sat in the hallway, trying to calm the babies, Tracy tells me of a lovely old lady who walks up to her and starts talking to her, telling her that she was doing such a good job and managing the twins, complimenting her as a mother, how beautiful her babies were. Tracy tells me that this little old lady was so sweet, and kind, like the most loving grandmother, the way she was talking to Tracy. Anyway, the little old lady continues on down the hall, out through the doors and out through the reception area. Tracy sits there for a moment and then gets this really strong urge to go after the little old lady and thank her for her kindness. So she goes out to the reception, and there were two ladies sitting at the reception area, and she asked them, where did the little old lady go? Well, they said, what little old lady? No one's been past, no one's come out, no one's been past us. There were two of them there and they didn't see anybody. Tracy's like, oh, and goes back down the hallway to see where the old lady might have come from, but it was a dead end. So she had just appeared. It's a beautiful example of manifested compassion. Perhaps the raised vibrational level from the church service allowed the spirit form to manifest so strongly. Some 20 years later, Tracy's husband passes away from a brief but severe illness. And about a year after Charles's passing, Tracy was out driving alone in the car, struggling with grief and feelings of despair, and she was calling out to Charles. She needed to know that he was okay and that he was with her. She was asking for him to help her, give her strength to keep going. She asked for a sign. She was calling out for a sign that he was hearing her. Well, the next thing, her cell phone rings. His name and number pops up on her cell phone screen. She pulled off the road, shaking and sobbing. The phone had stopped ringing. She calms herself and then rings the number. A man answers, not Charles, but he had recently got a new phone and had been assigned this number. Tracy explains to him that it was her late husband's number and it had just called her. The new owner of the phone said, I never made a call. I assured Tracy when she told me the story that it was definitely a sign that she was being helped, she was being heard, and it gave her the courage to carry on. How blessed we are to know that our cries for help are heard, and sometimes they can be answered in the physical world. I've experienced this kind of comfort myself, firstly back in 1985, and then most recently in 2018. In 1985, my best friend was killed. I was bereft. Months later, my grief still raw, I sat in my flat alone on a Saturday afternoon, and I was playing some beautiful music from Vangelis. I closed my eyes and I sat that way for about half an hour, just with the music playing over and over and over. And then I opened my eyes. My eyes were drawn to, looked straight at a dried flower arrangement that I had hanging from my mantelpiece. And there on the dried flower arrangement was a golden curl of hair. I looked at it, I thought, what on earth's that? What? So anyway, I went up and I picked it off the flowers, and it was a perfect circle of shining golden hair. There was no scissor cut where it might have been cut. I'm like, it's just a curl of golden shining hair. I was like, wow. So I put it in a little silk pouch, and I kept it in my treasure box for years. And I showed just one or two people. And everyone that saw it was like, oh, wow, that's pretty amazing, and told them that it had just appeared, didn't know where it came from. And every now and again I would take that little silk pouch out and have a look at the hair and just marvel over that, because it had really given me comfort at that time where I was feeling very grief-struck. One day I went to look at the curl and it was gone. No trace of strands or hair remained. It had disappeared as mysteriously as it had arrived some 15 years earlier. And in 2018, on a cold winter's evening, It was very cold. I was out walking on my own in my own neighbourhood. I was going through quite a difficult time, and I found that walking in the dark alone with my thoughts was a good thing. I walked past an empty property. The house had been demolished by earthquake damage, but the fence remained. It was just a low concrete fence. And I noticed there was a blanket just kind of sitting on top of this fence, and I thought, oh. I picked it up. It wasn't damp or cold as I expected, because it was a very damp, cold July evening. So I thought, oh, it must have just been put there. But there was no one around, no traffic either. The streets were empty and quiet. It was about 10 o'clock at night. So I gathered it up and put it around my shoulders and walked home. I got home and examined it. It was clean. There was no fluff or hair. There was no smell. Remarkable. Even more remarkable was that over the past few weeks I had been saying to my friend at work how much I would love a vintage tartan woolen blanket, especially in vibrant blue colours, which I'd never seen one in vibrant blue colours. This blanket was that exact vibrant blue tartan, vintage. I couldn't believe it. And so I was so moved to realise that someone knew what I was going through and wanted to give me comfort. What better way than a cosy, comforting blanket to wrap myself? Our beloved Helena Blavatsky faced multiple challenges throughout the later years of her work especially. She faced criticisms, lies, and public campaigns to try and bring her into disrepute. There are examples of her being helped by the others. One example is that she'd been up late at night trying to organise her papers for an important meeting in the morning. The papers were in disarray and spread about the room. Upon waking in the morning, she found the papers all neatly in order, just as she needed them for her public meeting. Colonel Alcott wrote in Old Diary Leaves, Volume 1, of an extraordinary visit from Master Moira. Colonel Alcott writes, "I was quietly reading with all my attention centred on my book. Nothing in the evening's incidents had prepared me for seeing an adept in his astral body. I had not wished for it, tried to conjure it up with my fancy, nor in the least expected it." Master Moira tells him during their conversation that he had come at the crisis when I needed him, and at the end of their extraordinary interaction, the Colonel wished for some physical evidence of the Master's visit, that it had not been a hallucination. The Master removed the turban from his head, giving it to Colonel Alcott, and vanished. Colonel Alcott wrote, "The cloth I have still, and in one corner is marked in thread the signature cipher that he always attaches to the notes he writes to myself and others. And I believe this turban is still able to be viewed and resides in the Adyar Museum." Yep. Did you see it, Richard, when you were there? I know, Susan, you've seen it, yeah. Hunches and gut feelings. We've all had them. They are fleeting, yet powerful and clear. These commonplace expressions are interestingly accepted terms for intuition, the tuning into information that we really need to know for a specific event or situation. Think about your own gut feelings. Do you listen to them? Do you act on them? And how do they make you feel? Where do these feelings come from? My opinion is that they are impressed on us by unseen benevolent beings, unseen helpers. There are plenty of examples of people who have had strong feelings not to go somewhere, catch a flight they were booked on, or change their plans last minute. So many examples of last minute, seemingly impulsive changes of mind have resulted in life-saving outcomes. Statistically, airlines report that on flights that have crashed, there was an unusually higher level of last-minute cancellations and no-shows than on flights that have reached their destinations. Along with the hunches and gut feelings, there is the voice. I call it the inner voice, or sometimes just the voice. I'm not talking about a bit of inner dialogue you have with yourself over, trivial things. I'm talking about the voice. It's clear, it's specific, and it has an authority. Christchurch, February 22nd, 12:30 p.m. I had hopped out of Phil's car in the CBD. We'd had our lunch together on the riverbank, and he was driving back to his office a few blocks away. He only got half an hour, but I got an hour. And I always like to finish off with the last half hour of walking into the open casual mall in town. He pulled right up by the CTV building. I got out, and he said, Are you going into casual mall now? And I said, yes. And that's when the voice said, in loud and clear in my mind, go back to work. And I stood there, and I thought, no, I don't want to go back to work. Why would I want to go back to work early? And then this time it said again, like, bombed me, go back to work. And I thought, okay. I couldn't argue with it. It was that forceful. Meanwhile, I'm standing there, Phil's pulled up, the door's open, and he's going, well, what are you doing? I said, well, apparently I'm going back to work. And I really didn't want to go back to work because I didn't like my office, I tried to avoid it at all costs. So every moment away from it was pleasure. Anyway, so I told him I was going back to work, which turned out to be vitally important, and Phil drove off. I dawdled back and I called into the hunting and fishing shop on the way back, any excuse not to go to the office. And still I couldn't settle and felt agitated. So finally I got back to my desk. And this was at 12:45. 6 minutes later, the earthquake struck. If I had been on my usual route at this time, I would have been here. To that voice, I am so grateful. Who or what was that voice? My guardian angel, a protecting spirit, an unseen helper? 100%. As the days followed on from that devastating event, stories did emerge of people changing their minds at the last minute, deciding not to go into the city. Some were driving in their cars and actually got this strong urge to turn around and go home, and that's what they did. Terrible things happen all around the world all the time. Natural disasters, killings, fires. C.W. Leadbetter writes, often a catastrophe is karmic in nature and cannot be averted. It may be that people concerned are destined to die and therefore cannot be saved from death. In many cases, they may still be, to some extent, prepared for it, and may certainly be helped upon the other side after it's over. He goes on to say that whenever a great catastrophe of any kind takes place, there is also a special sending of help. Leadbetter goes on to explain that if we ever find ourselves in imminent danger that we can do nothing to avert, we must face that danger calmly and bravely. Our minds will be open to receive guidance which the helpers are trying to give. Think back to that fiery car crash. The track drivers in both cases called out to God, asked for help. They prayed. They put their minds in a place where they could be helped. And as for the human helpers on that crash scene, they turned their thoughts to invoking divine intervention to save those lives. Very forcefully, by the sound of it too. Charles Leadbetter himself had an experience he writes of. He was walking along a street and there was a terrible storm, and a voice loudly said to him, "Spring away." It was so forceful, he did so without hesitation. And at that moment, a chimney pot crashed down on the footpath. Had he not listened, he would have been terribly injured, if not killed. Now, animals as messengers sent from the divine realm, assisting, providing comfort, a reason to continue to live. In some instances, being used by a higher being to provide a positive physical presence when required. A friend shared a podcast of a story of a Taranaki farmer, a single father who in 2015 had made the decision to end his life one evening. He had tucked his 2 little children into bed and kissed them goodnight. At midnight, he headed out to the shed with the intention to take his own life. He had a shotgun and was about to load it when the light bulb blew, and he thought, oh, I can't even get that right. Meanwhile, a horse, and it's quite interesting in the podcast because he doesn't say it was his horse. He said a black horse. It's kind of, which I thought was kind of strange, but he didn't elaborate. He said that a horse came into the shed, came right up to him, and kept rubbing his head on his chest. Wouldn't leave him alone. And he thought, oh, the horse just wouldn't leave it. The light bulb would blow on. He said, oh, it's just not my time. And he said as he walked out of the shed on this clear winter's night, there was a big misty arc over the field. And he's still with us today. One more wonderful example in a town near an Austrian border, twin 10-year-old boys were swimming in the frigid waters of Lake Constance. When they both began to flounder, their father swam out to rescue them. Before he could reach them, he witnessed their family's collie, Fritz, who had been dead for a year, by their side. Fritz guided them safely back to the beach, but as onlookers rushed to their side, Fritz disappeared. And it wasn't just the father who'd seen Fritz, but about a dozen eyewitnesses. And the police report from this incident confirmed the account, and that was taken from a book called Animal Grace by Mary Lou Randall. So I have another wee video for you I'd like to share with you. It's from a TV series called Dogs 101.
6 years ago, Pat Dugan, a former Marine, police officer, and Vietnam vet, was facing one of the hardest times in his life.
I went from a speed of 100 miles an hour to 0 miles an hour when I retired. I wasn't ready for it to end, you know. I wanted to keep going.
To make matters worse, Pat had recently lost his beloved dog, Lucky.
I know this sounds ridiculous, but I didn't want to love no more. When I buried him, I was about ready to go in the ground with him.
Even without his friend Lucky, Pat still took a daily walk in the park. When he least expected it, his life changed.
I saw this white speck come out of the fog, and I was wondering, what is that? And so as we got closer, I realized it was a Jack Russell Terrier. I almost felt the spark when I touched him. And that was it. It was love at first sight.
Pat kept in touch with his local animal shelter, but no one ever did claim this dog, now called JR.
I said, why did you call him JR? And he said, because he's a Jack Russell Terrier.
There was something mystical about JR's appearance in Pat's life, and on Veterans Day, JR had something to show him.
We were walking at the cemetery, and he wanted more leash.
JR just kept pulling. We let him have the lead, and JR went over, and he started scratching at a gravestone that was almost obscured by debris.
So he started digging and uncovering the grave.
And the name on the grave? Corporal Jack Russell.
It was amazing that JR should uncover a grave marker of a veteran on Veterans Day with the same name as his family line, Jack Russell. Pat readily admits that JR has had a profound effect on his life.
He taught me it was okay to love openly. And he taught me it was okay to love something enough that you could cry. He has to be a heavenly gift. He couldn't have come nowhere else. Come on.
Divine intervention is not about rescuing us from challenges or granting our every wish, but rather the assistance given, I believe, works in harmony with the laws of nature and karma. As we strive along our human pathway, these helpers gently nudge us in the right direction, offering subtle guidance and inspiration. We may not always be aware of their presence, but moments of profound insight, synchronicities, flashes of inspiration, often when you first wake, can be attributed to the influence of our unseen friends. In some of the examples I have shared with you today, you can see that in times of great despair and sorrow, when we feel utterly alone, it is in these moments that the benevolent entities offer comfort, guidance, and sometimes even physical assistance. With this, we can find the courage to face life's seemingly insurmountable challenges, recover from grief, loneliness, or loss. By cultivating within ourselves compassion and a loving heart, we open ourselves to a deeper connection to the higher frequency energies, and remember that we are never alone. There exists a web of support woven by benevolent beings guiding and illuminating our human journey on earth. I hope you all enjoyed that.